When was the last time you felt like your mind was truly alive? Not busy, not efficient, but alive, aware, awake, like something within you had just woken up after years of silence. You probably don't remember. And that's not your fault. At some point, maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10, you chose a path, a degree, a job, a skill. You got good at it. People respected you for it. You told yourself you were building a future. And maybe you were. But something else started happening in the background, something subtle. Your world got smaller. Without even noticing, you began to orbit the same conversations, solve the same kinds of problems, think the same kinds of thoughts. Slowly, the fire that once drove you, the curiosity, the hunger to understand everything became dim. Not because it died, but because it was buried under routine. And here you are now, competent, capable, respected. But is that enough? Late at night, a thought visits you like a whisper. Is this all I'm meant for? You scroll through endless content, consume ideas, admire people who build, invent, explore. You call them geniuses. You tell yourself they were born different. But deep down, a voice inside you disagrees. It tells you the truth you've tried to ignore. You used to be one of them. You were once a child with impossible questions and fearless imagination. A teenager who saw patterns where others saw chaos. A young adult who dreamed of mastering everything, not just one thing. But somewhere along the line, someone convinced you that being a specialist was safer, more practical, more realistic. So you shrank. You buried your wildest ambitions beneath adult responsibilities. You put yourself in a labeled box, locked the door, and called it success. But what if that door was never locked? What if you've just forgotten how to open it? Have you ever sat in a quiet room and felt something wasn't right? Everything around you appears normal, maybe even comfortable. Your life seems to follow a straight line. Work, rest, responsibilities, occasional distractions repeat. You're not in crisis. There's no visible fire, no collapse. From the outside, you look like you've got it together. And maybe you've even convinced yourself that everything is fine. But deep beneath that calm surface, there's a noise, faint, persistent, almost like a whisper in the back of your mind. It's the sound of something slipping away. At first, you dismiss it. You tell yourself it's just stress. Maybe you didn't sleep enough. Maybe you need a break. You go back to your routine. You check your emails, answer the same questions, do the same things you've done for years, tasks you could do in your sleep. And in a way, you are asleep. Because that whisper is trying to tell you something you don't want to hear. You are not in control. Not really. You've mistaken routine for mastery, stability for direction. The calm around you is not peace, it's stagnation. You've built a life around repetition, and now your mind is quietly suffocating. But you don't confront it, because to admit it would mean facing the possibility that you're falling behind, that you've stopped growing, and that terrifies you. So instead, you cling tighter to the illusion that your current knowledge is enough, that your field is secure, that being good at one thing will protect you in a world that's evolving faster than ever. But the truth is more brutal. Someone somewhere is learning something you don't even know exists. They are moving silently, gathering perspectives from fields you've never considered, combining ideas that seem unrelated. And when they emerge, they won't just compete with you, they'll replace you. Because the world doesn't belong to the one who knows more about less. It belongs to the one who sees everything and can connect it. And the worst part, you can feel this happening, but you don't know what to do about it. That internal discomfort, that ache you can't name. It's not laziness. It's not failure. It's misalignment. It's your deeper self trying to pull you out of the illusion you've built, trying to tell you that control without growth is just another name for fear. We were all born curious, wild, exploratory, children who asked impossible questions and didn't fear being wrong. But adulthood taught us to value predictability, to specialize, to narrow our focus. It told us that safety was found in the familiar, that the unknown was too risky, too impractical. And so we obeyed. But now here you are with years of expertise, a respectable title, and a creeping sense of irrelevance. Because deep down you know the truth, the world is not standing still to accommodate your comfort. It's moving, fast. And it doesn't care how long you've been in your lane, It only rewards those willing to switch tracks, adapt and see more. This isn't a crisis of capability, it's a crisis of vision. If you feel stuck, uninspired, or quietly anxious, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've outgrown the space you built. You've reached the edge of the map you drew for yourself years ago, and now you have a choice. Ignore the whisper and sink slowly into irrelevance, or listen to it and step into the unknown. Because this isn't the calm of confidence, it's the calm before the storm. And if you wait too long to move, it will be too late to catch up. There was a time when being an expert meant something, when mastery over one subject, one tool, or one system could secure your place in the world. If you were a great blacksmith, a brilliant accountant, a master technician society needed you, people came to you for answers. Your name held weight, your reputation opened doors, but that world no longer exists. We live in a time where information is infinite, technology is exponential, and change doesn't knock, it breaks the door down without warning. In this world, the person who knows just one thing, no matter how deeply, is walking on a collapsing bridge. Let's be honest, you've worked hard. You've put in the hours, you've mastered a system, a method, a language, a process. You've probably heard yourself say things like, "This is my lane," or "I know what I'm doing." But deep inside, if you're brutally honest, you also know that the ground is shifting beneath your feet. Because someone younger, faster, or more connected is already emerging, and they don't just know what you know. They know what you don't. They've studied your discipline, but they've also studied psychology, design, technology, storytelling, business strategy, neuroscience, communication. They've become generalist connectors in a world that no longer rewards technical isolation. And the most painful part, you're not losing because you're not good. You're losing because you're not wide. Mastery of one field used to be a moat. Now it's a cage, because while you've been perfecting the same process for the last 10 years, the rest of the world has been forming new systems entirely. Systems where interdisciplinary thinking is not just valuable, but vital. We were taught to specialize, to go deep, to focus, and that advice made sense in a slower world. But this world moves at the speed of curiosity, not repetition. Imagine this: a new problem arises in your field. It can't be solved with technical skill alone. It requires an understanding of human behavior, ethics, aesthetics, and systems thinking. The old school expert, the one with tunnel vision, panics. They defend their tools, they say, "This isn't how it's supposed to work." But the polymath smiles, because they've seen this pattern before, not in your field, but in 5 others. And they draw the answer from the intersection. That's who you're competing with now. Not just someone who's good at your job, but someone who doesn't need your job because they've built their own category, their own ecosystem of understanding. And here's the truth nobody wants to say. Out loud, the world no longer needs more experts. It needs interpreters, connectors, synthesizers, people who can take a mountain of data and transform it into meaning. People who can step outside their profession and still remain powerful. But that kind of person is forged, not born. They're built through discomfort, through the conscious decision to leave mastery behind and embrace uncertainty again, to be a beginner again, and again, and again. That's where the edge is now, not at the bottom of the well, but at the crossroads of knowledge. So ask yourself, are you sharpening the same blade every year, hoping the world won't change the shape of the fight? Because it already has. You're not in danger because you're lacking skill. You're in danger because your vision is narrow. Because the world now belongs to those who don't just know, they connect. They combine, they create from many angles at once. And if you keep clinging to the comfort of being the expert, you may soon find yourself forgotten by a world that has already moved on. What do you see when you hear names like Leonardo da Vinci, Benjamin Franklin, Marie Curie, or Steve Jobs? Genius, right? That's the word that rises first, almost automatically. We're trained to believe these figures were born extraordinary, that they carried something mysterious in their blood, a rare gift the rest of us weren't given. And because we believe that, we let ourselves off the hook. We admire them from afar, call them one of a kind, and quietly return to our own routines convinced we could never be like them. But that story is a lie, a beautiful, disempowering lie. Because when you peel away the myths, what you find is something far more human and far more attainable. These weren't people who followed rules. They weren't born to fit within categories. They were relentless boundary breakers, rule disruptors, knowledge trespassers. Da Vinci was not just an artist. He was an anatomist, a military engineer, a philosopher, and inventor. Marie Curie didn't stop at chemistry, she transformed physics. Benjamin Franklin wasn't just a statesman, he was a writer-scientist, inventor, printer, and diplomat. And Steve Jobs, he wasn't just a tech visionary, he fused design psychology, marketing engineering, and Eastern philosophy into a single disruptive force. What made them legendary wasn't some secret gene, it was their refusal to be just one thing. In a world obsessed with identity, they were brave enough to be unlabelable. While others stayed within the safe walls of expertise, they wandered into foreign territory, willing to look foolish, willing to start from zero, willing to be misunderstood. And that willingness is what allowed them to see what no one else saw. Because the truth is this, the biggest ideas don't come from deep inside one field. They come from the collision of fields, from the intersection where biology meets design, where art meets math, where philosophy meets engineering. That's where breakthroughs live. That's where revolutions are born. But to reach that intersection, you have to leave the comfort of mastery. You have to risk walking into rooms where you're not the smartest person anymore. You have to be okay being a student again. That's the paradox. The people we admire most are the ones who never stop being curious, who never let one title define them, even when the world begged them to settle into one lane. And yet here you are, possibly stuck in a narrow box with a clear label. Engineer, designer, manager, teacher. You tell yourself that going deeper into your niche will make you more secure, more valuable. But what if it's doing the opposite? What if every year you invest in only one identity? You become a little less flexible, a little more predictable, and a little easier to replace. You don't need to abandon what you know, but you do need to expand it, explode it, to wander into new disciplines, to get lost, to start combining instead of isolating. Because that's where greatness happens, not through the depth of knowledge alone, but through the connections others are too afraid to make. You think you can't be like Da Vinci? Let me tell you the truth. The only thing standing between you and him is the courage to cross borders. Imagine digging a hole every single day of your life. You wake up, walk to the same spot and begin to dig. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the hole gets deeper. And the deeper it gets, the more people applaud you. Look how committed he is. Look how focused. Look how deep he's gone. You feel proud, respected, safe. But one day you pause and look up, and all you see are walls. Walls of dirt. No horizon. No sunlight. No movement. Just the echo of your own effort bouncing off the very hole you've trapped yourself in. This is what specialization has become. Once a symbol of mastery, it's quietly turned into a form of blindness, a tunnel vision so convincing you don't even realize how much of the world you're missing. You've been told that going deep is the only path to success, but no one told you the cost, the loss of perspective, the erosion of imagination, and the quiet death of creative intelligence. And here's the part they never teach in school. While you've been digging, others have been walking. They've been exploring different fields, connecting dots you never noticed, collecting tools from disciplines you've never touched. While you've been perfecting your one trade, they've been mapping the entire landscape. They don't dig, they design. And when it's time to build something new, guess who leads? It's not the deepest expert. It's the one who sees the whole field. There's a kind of safety in being a specialist. It offers clarity, predictability, and the illusion of control. You know, the language, the rules, the rhythm. But that safety comes at a price: irrelevance. Because the world is not asking for better technicians, it's asking for integrators. People who can stand at the intersection of domains and translate between them. Let's be honest, most people don't go deep because they're brave. They go deep because they're afraid. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of being a beginner again. Afraid of stepping outside the arena where they're already respected. So they double down. They stay where they're comfortable. They confuse depth with growth, forgetting that you can be moving downward without ever expanding outward. And eventually they hit bedrock. No more depth. No more discovery. Just repetition. Just refinement. a life spent improving what no longer matters. Do you feel it? That quiet discomfort, that nagging voice that says there has to be more than this. That's not a flaw in your thinking. That's your intelligence begging for oxygen. It's the part of you that remembers when you were curious, experimental, wild, when the world felt big, not narrow. You weren't born to live in one tunnel. You were born with a mind built for movement, for range, for diversity, for play. But specialization trains that mind to sit still, to follow instructions, to go deeper into a smaller and smaller space, until you can't even see where you are anymore. But it doesn't have to stay that way, because the moment you step outside your tunnel, the moment you dare to learn something that has nothing to do with your field, your perspective explodes, your senses sharpen, your thinking expands. You stop being just another expert and start becoming something far more rare. A connector, a translator, a visionary. You can still dig if you want, but maybe it's time to climb out of the hole and look around. Comfort is seductive. It whispers in your ear with gentle promises. Stay here. You're safe. You've earned this. It wraps itself around your routine like a warm blanket, shielding you from the cold winds of uncertainty. It makes you feel secure, respected, and even successful. But what it never tells you, what it hides behind its soothing voice, is that comfort is also a cage, a beautiful one, but a cage nonetheless. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't arrive with chains or locks. It disguises itself as progress, as a stable job, a reliable title, a well-worn path. It praises you for being consistent, for being efficient, for being someone who doesn't rock the boat. And while you're congratulated for staying in your lane, something deeper in you starts to wither. That something is hunger, not physical hunger, but intellectual, emotional, existential hunger. The kind of hunger that once drove you to ask big questions, to seek something beyond yourself, to stretch into new dimensions of thought. But comfort numbs that hunger. It convinces you that wanting more is greedy, impractical, reckless. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you become someone you no longer recognize, someone who trades potential for predictability. You tell yourself you're fine. You repeat it like a mantra. Everything is fine, but you feel it, don't you? That ache, that invisible pressure inside your chest, that tension in your gut when you see someone doing something daring, something disruptive, something alive. A part of you envies them, not for their success, but for their aliveness, for their willingness to risk, to move, to grow. Because deep down you know the truth. Comfort is not the absence of danger. It is the slow erosion of your soul. You weren't meant to live safely. You weren't meant to stay inside a box you outgrew years ago. Your mind is not a machine to repeat patterns. It's an instrument of exploration built to adapt, rewire, and evolve. And yet here you are, following the same motions, using the same language, solving the same problems year after year. Why? Because it's easier. Because risk is terrifying. Because stepping into the unknown means surrendering control. It means facing the possibility of failure, embarrassment, even identity collapse. And so we avoid it. We reinforce our comfort zone like a fortress, adding new routines, new distractions, new justifications. But no matter how thick the walls, the prison remains. And here's the hardest part. You built this cage yourself. No one forced you in. You chose it slowly, unconsciously, with every time you said, "That's not my field," or "I don't have time for that," or "I'm already good at what I do." And now the walls have grown too familiar to question. But what if you did question them? What if you paused and asked yourself, is comfort really serving me, or is it sedating me? What if the very thing you've been clinging to for stability is the exact thing keeping you from becoming extraordinary? Because here's the paradox: everything you want, growth, clarity, creativity, meaning, exists outside the perimeter of your current comfort. And the only way to reach it is to step beyond the line. You don't have to destroy your life. You don't have to quit everything, but you do have to disrupt yourself, to break the trance, to stretch the mind, to confront the parts of you that have been asleep for too long. Comfort will beg you to stay, but purpose will dare you to leave. So ask yourself one final question. Are you resting, or are you rotting? Because only one of those leads to life. Have you ever felt a tiny spark light up in your brain when you learn something new? It's subtle, a flicker really, not a fire, not a lightning strike, just a small shift, an unexpected insight, a connection that wasn't there before. Most people ignore it. They move on. They go back to their to-do list, their inbox, their routine. But that spark, that single brief ignition, is how every revolution begins. Because your mind is not a warehouse. It's not meant to just store information and keep it organized in tidy boxes. Your mind is a network, a living system of connections, energy, and meaning. And every time you step outside your familiar knowledge, you activate parts of it that were dormant. You light up corridors you didn't even know existed. You begin to rewire yourself. And that's not a metaphor. It's biological truth. Neuroscience confirms what the ancient philosophers intuited: the mind expands with novelty. The more diverse the inputs, the more robust the connections. When you read a book outside your field, listen to a podcast on a subject you barely understand, or even just spend time with people who think differently from you, your brain doesn't just learn, it evolves. New neural pathways form. Old ones reorganize. Synaptic plasticity increases. It's like your brain steps into the gym, not to lift heavier, but to think wider. Now imagine doing this over and over again. One spark becomes two, two become 10, and suddenly something extraordinary happens. You begin to see differently. Not just more, but deeper. Patterns that once seemed random start to make sense. Ideas that once felt disconnected begin to form constellations. This is what thinkers like Da Vinci, Franklin, and Curie lived for: not accumulation, but connection. Not memorization, but revelation. But here's where most people get stuck. They wait for curiosity to feel comfortable. They only explore what's adjacent to what they already know. They dip a toe into a new subject, but if it challenges them, if it makes them feel ignorant, slow, or out of their depth, they retreat. They go back to what's familiar, what they're good at, what makes them feel smart. And in doing so, they kill the spark. They smother the one thing that could have changed everything. Because the truth is, curiosity doesn't feel comfortable at first. It feels humbling. It reminds you how much you don't know. But if you lean into that discomfort, if you push through the fog of unfamiliarity, you begin to unlock a different kind of intelligence. One that isn't based on being right, but on being awake. And when that awakening happens, everything shifts. You stop thinking in straight lines and start thinking in webs. You stop asking, what do I already know, and start wondering, what haven't I even considered yet? You stop defining yourself by one skill, one label, one area of expertise, and you start becoming something much more rare. A multidimensional thinker, someone who can see through complexity, someone who connects art to science, emotion, to logic systems, to stories. Someone who doesn't just solve problems, but sees problems others can't even detect because their mind is lit from every angle. That's the mental revolution. That's the power of stepping beyond the obvious. That's the gift of curiosity, not as entertainment, but as evolution. So the next time you feel that spark, that faint glimmer, when something unfamiliar piques your interest, don't ignore it. That spark is not random. It's the future knocking. And if you follow it, it will lead you to a mind you never knew you had. Everyone talks about self-discovery like it's something you stumble upon in a quiet moment, a journal entry, a meditation session, a walk through the woods. But here's the truth most people avoid. You don't find yourself in calm waters. You find yourself in chaos. And not just any chaos, the kind you willingly step into. Real self-knowledge doesn't come from mastering what you already know. It comes from being stretched by what you don't. It comes from standing at the edge of your competence and choosing to go further anyway. From putting yourself in situations that challenge not just your skills, but your identity. Because only when the ego is disrupted do you begin to see what lies underneath it. Think about this. When was the last time you learned something that had nothing to do with what you're good at? Something that made you feel unsure, slow, even foolish. Most people avoid those experiences like the plague. Why? Because we live in a culture that worships confidence and punishes vulnerability. You're supposed to know your lane, stick to your strengths, and project certainty at all times. But the people who grow the most, the people who evolve into something extraordinary, are the ones who are brave enough to look incompetent again and again. They understand something profound. The unfamiliar doesn't erase who you are. It reveals who you are. Every time you step into a new domain, something outside your comfort zone, you activate a deeper part of your psyche. You confront frustration, you face the discomfort of being bad at something, and in that discomfort, a mirror appears. It shows you how you react under pressure, how you handle the unknown, how much patience, resilience, and humility you really possess. And the insight that emerges from that mirror, that's not academic knowledge. That's self-knowledge, the rarest and most valuable kind. Because here's the secret, your mind doesn't grow through repetition. It grows through contradiction, through surprise, through the tension of what doesn't yet make sense. And when you refuse to confront that tension, when you stay only within the circle of what's familiar, you don't just stop growing. You stop knowing yourself. You become a performer of expertise, a curator of comfort, a stranger to your own potential. But when you seek out what challenges you, when you deliberately pursue the unfamiliar, something incredible happens. New parts of you come alive. You discover strengths you didn't know you had, passions you never expected, and perhaps most importantly, limits you once believed in begin to dissolve. You begin to realize that the boundaries you thought were real were just the walls of your mental routine. You realize that you're not just an engineer or a manager or a creative. You're a living, fluid, multidimensional being with far more range than you've ever tapped into. But to access that range, you have to stop asking, what am I good at? And start asking, what haven't I dared to learn? Because that's where the real you is hiding, not in what you've already mastered, but in what you're still afraid to touch. And the more you touch those places, the unknown, the uncomfortable, the unfamiliar, the clearer your reflection becomes. So no self-knowledge doesn't come wrapped in ease. It comes wrapped in challenge, in discomfort, in friction. But that's how you know it's real. Because you can't discover your edge without walking toward it. We live in a culture that despises vulnerability. From a young age, we're taught to fear the unknown, to avoid mistakes, to hide our confusion, and to never admit we don't know. School punishes failure. Work rewards certainty. Social media glorifies perfection. And somewhere along the way, we absorb the lie that being unsure, inexperienced, or new is something shameful. So we armor up. We build identities around competence, around what we can prove, around what we already know. We avoid new domains unless we're confident we'll excel. We don't ask questions unless we're sure the answer won't embarrass us. And worst of all, we stop trying new things not because we're not curious, but because we're terrified of looking foolish. But here's the brutal truth. You cannot grow without vulnerability. And I'm not talking about the soft social media version of vulnerability, the curated kind that gets you likes and validation. I'm talking about the real kind, the kind that makes your stomach knot, the kind that forces you to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to try. The kind that strips away your ego and exposes the part of you that's still alive, still learning, still human, because that's where the mind breathes. That's where growth isn't forced, it's invited. When you stop pretending to know, the real knowing begins. When you stop trying to be impressive, you become receptive. And that receptivity, that's what unlocks freedom, because suddenly you're no longer defending a fixed identity. You're not protecting a title or reputation. You're free to become anyone. But to get there, you have to walk through the fire of discomfort. You have to let go of the pride that keeps you silent. The pride that says, if I don't look competent, I don't have value. That voice is not your ally. That voice is your cage. And the longer you listen to it, the smaller your world becomes. True power begins where pride ends. Because the moment you stop fearing what people think of your ignorance, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You become unpredictable, flexible, resilient. You start stepping into fields others avoid, learning skills no one expected, connecting dots others don't even see. You become someone no one can define, limit, or anticipate. And that's not weakness, that's sovereignty. Because while others cling to a fragile sense of expertise, you're expanding. While they defend what they already know, you're gathering what they'll never understand. While they fear failure, you're using it to fuel reinvention. You've stopped asking, how do I look? And started asking, what else can I learn? That shift changes everything. You no longer measure your worth by performance. You measure it by expansion, by motion, by how often you're willing to be uncomfortable in service of becoming more. That's what makes you magnetic. That's what makes you powerful. Not your resume, but your range. Not your perfection, but your willingness to risk imperfection for the sake of growth. Vulnerability is not the enemy of strength. It's the foundation of it. It's what makes a rigid mind fluid, a fearful mind brave, a prideful mind wise. So the next time you feel resistance rising, that fear of looking small and inexperienced out of your depth, lean in. That's not a signal to retreat. That's the exact place your future is hiding. Because the moment you embrace being a beginner, you stop being a prisoner of who you've already been and start becoming who you were always meant to be. We live in a world overflowing with information and starving for wisdom. Everywhere you look, there are data points, tutorials, how-to guides, and endless facts. But despite all this access, people are more confused than ever. They don't know who to trust, what to believe, or how to act. Because what we're missing isn't knowledge, it's judgment. And judgment isn't something you download. It's not a result of memorizing more facts or stacking up degrees. Judgment comes from perspective, from seeing the same reality through many different lenses. And that kind of clarity only comes from polymathy, the intentional pursuit of learning across multiple disciplines. When you master more than one field, something profound happens. You stop seeing knowledge as isolated silos. You begin to recognize the deeper architecture underneath everything, the patterns, the themes, the structures that repeat across domains. Psychology influences design, history mirrors business strategy, biology informs creativity, economics shapes behavior. Suddenly your mind doesn't just process information, it interprets it, it filters it, it transforms it into meaning. That's judgment, the rarest and most powerful intellectual skill in the modern age. And with judgment comes immunity. Because when you can think from multiple angles, you become resistant to manipulation. You're no longer swayed by headlines, trends, or surface-level arguments. You ask better questions. You see through emotional bait. You don't panic with the crowd because you've trained yourself to step back and see the wider field. While the world reacts, you respond. While others follow, you discern. While experts cling to their tiny tower, you survey the entire horizon. And that panoramic awareness, that cross-disciplinary clarity is power. Not just the kind of power that wins arguments, but the kind that shapes strategy, influences culture, and builds unshakable resilience. Because you're no longer dependent on one identity. You don't rise and fall with one title, one company, or one area of expertise. You've made yourself adaptable, dangerous, independent. That's what most people don't understand. Polymathy is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing how everything connects. And in a world that's becoming more complex by the day, that kind of integrative thinking is no longer optional, it's essential. Just look around. The people solving the biggest problems aren't always the most specialized. They're the ones who can see the invisible threads, who can connect technology to philosophy, business, to sociology, science, to storytelling. They're not just experts, they're interpreters of complexity, architects of systems, translators of meaning. And here's the hidden truth: they weren't born that way. They built it, piece by piece, domain by domain, curiosity by curiosity. They chose to keep learning even when they didn't need to. They chose discomfort over ease, expansion over safety, range over reputation. And in doing so, they became irreplaceable. So ask yourself, what are you really building? Are you accumulating facts or developing discernment? Are you perfecting a role or becoming someone who can play any role? Are you following a script or writing your own? Because the polymath doesn't just learn to know. They learn to see farther, to see deeper, to see what others miss entirely. And in that vision lies freedom. The freedom to adapt, to lead, to create something no one else saw coming. The freedom to become someone whose mind is not just sharp, but expansive. Someone who cannot be manipulated, contained, or ignored. Because once you build judgment, once you become immune to confusion, you're not just smart, you're sovereign. If there is one force that silently sabotages your growth more than anything else, it's not laziness. It's not a lack of time. It's not even fear. It's ego. The ego is clever. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It tells you that you're already doing enough, that you're ahead of most people, that you've mastered your craft, earned your place, and proven your worth. And in those whispers, something poisonous takes root, the belief that you no longer need to change. And that belief, is the beginning of your decline. Because the moment you start protecting what you know more than what you could know, you've stopped evolving. You've traded expansion for identity. You've made the fatal mistake of confusing mastery with immunity. But here's the truth: ego thrives on control, and control is the enemy of growth. You've likely spent years building your knowledge, your reputation, your professional lane. People recognize you for what you're good at. Maybe they even admire you. That feels good, of course it does. But what happens when the world shifts, when your industry changes, when the problems being asked require new tools, new thinking, and new cross-disciplinary insights? Most people cling even tighter to what they know. They double down on the familiar. They insist they're right. They defend their corner like a soldier guarding a crumbling castle. Not because they lack intelligence, but because their ego can't bear the thought of being seen as a beginner again. But let me offer you something radical. To survive this new world, you must kill the ego before the ego kills your future. Because ego wants safety, but transformation lives in risk. Ego wants recognition, but reinvention requires humility. Every time you refuse to try something new because you don't want to look unprepared, that's ego. Every time you stay silent in a conversation because you're not the expert in that topic, that's ego. Every time you say, "That's not my thing," instead of, "Maybe I could learn," that, you've chosen the comfort of identity over the freedom of possibility. And the cost is enormous. Because the longer you obey your ego, the narrower your world becomes. You start filtering reality through a single lens. You stop seeing nuance. You stop hearing ideas that challenge yours. You stop growing not because you can't, but because your self-image won't allow it. This is why polymaths are so rare. Because becoming one demands the death of certainty. It demands a willingness to look unpolished, to ask dumb questions, to feel lost, even when you've already achieved success. It's not just an intellectual decision, it's a spiritual confrontation. A letting go of who you think you are, to become who you're actually capable of being. But if you do this, if you dismantle the ego brick by brick, something astonishing happens. You gain range. You gain agility. You gain vision that no longer bends around your pride. And suddenly the world expands. You walk into unfamiliar rooms with curiosity, not shame. You explore disciplines with excitement, not fear. You reinvent yourself not once, but over and over, becoming uncontainable, unpredictable, undeniable. That's real power. Not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that doesn't need it. So the next time your ego tells you, "Stay in your lane," you look it straight in the eye and say, "There are no lanes. Only landscapes I haven't walked yet." And then you start walking. In a world that changes by the minute, the most dangerous thing you can do is stand still. Not physically, but intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. The greatest threat to your future isn't failure or competition. It's comfort. It's believing that being good at one thing is enough, that you've made it. That mastery in your field will somehow protect you from irrelevance. It won't. Because the truth is brutal and inescapable. Someone somewhere is learning across disciplines, exploring connections you've never imagined. And when they show up, they won't just do your job better, they'll replace the job entirely. Not because they're smarter, but because they're wider. They see more. They think in patterns, not silos. That's the kind of mind the future belongs to. So what do? You reinvent, constantly. You drop the ego, you stop clinging to what you know, and start falling in love with what you don't. You study outside your field. You ask naive questions. You allow yourself to look like a beginner again and again. Because that is where true power lives, not in knowing more, but in being unafraid to learn more. This isn't about being a genius. It's about being curious. It's about developing judgment, the kind that comes from cross-pollinating ideas, challenging your own assumptions, and refusing to be confined by a single label. You want to be unforgettable. Then don't be another narrow expert. Be a connector, a translator, a bridge between worlds. Learn widely, think differently, and above all, never let comfort become the excuse that kills your potential. Because the cost of staying the same is no longer survival, it's invisibility.